request you all to drop a yes in the chat box if you can see my screen. Can you see my screen? Anybody? If you can see my screen, just drop a yes, please. Lovely, lovely. Everybody said yes. All right, perfect. Thank you very much. Lovely. All right. So here we are to measure impact. We are evaluating development programs through mixed methods research. I'm sure a lot of you may have done this before. This may be new to some of you. This may be something you've done in theory, may not have done in practice. So to those of you who've already done it, it might seem a little repetitive in parts. To those who are doing it for the first time, it might seem challenging in some parts, but I'm here to help make it as entertaining, interactive, / meaningful and enriching as possible. And I would request you all to also participate as much as you can. So this is me, and I'm here to conduct this session. All right, okay. So basics of the workshop. I am somebody who loves color coding, and I have color coded this entire workshop so that we can make it as interactive as possible. So all explanations will be in blue. We will be dealing with a running case study throughout the workshop, which will come in green colored slides or headings. Any kind of quizzes in the middle, wherein we will very briefly and easily test the concepts that we just did, will be in red. And if there are any resources, any links, any kind of documents, which maybe you would want to look at later, any publications, which are linked to our conversation and our discussion, but which are too long to go into in the workshop, are in yellow. So that's explanations, case study, quiz, and resources in blue, green, red, and yellow, right? And what we will hope to learn in the entire workshop is two things. The first is, what do we evaluate? And the second is, how do we evaluate? So in what do we evaluate, we will look at what aspects do we measure. And how do we evaluate, we will look at what methods do we use to measure impact. And that will be the broad structure of the workshop with the color coding involved. Any questions, anybody at this point in terms of what we are going to go ahead with? If you have no questions, just drop a no in the chat box. Any questions? Lovely, great, fabulous. We're off to a good start. All right, so the first part of the workshop is, what do we evaluate and what aspects do we measure? So when we want to decode the word impact, and this is where I want you all to contribute in the chat box, how do you define the word impact? If you can just describe it in a line. I know that it's difficult to describe it perhaps, but if in a layman's term, what is impact? In one line, if you have to say it. Because we're here to, okay, the actual effect of something, post-intervention effect, change achieved as a result of an intervention, consequence. So a lot of people are talking about change, effect, consequence, post-intervention, tangible change that can be measured. All right. Anybody else? Impact. When we look at the word impact, we're talking about impact investments, we're talking about development, impact. What do we, okay. Mosham is saying positive or negative outcomes. Anshul is saying that what value it finally gives. Shruti is talking about how one thing is affecting another. All right, interesting. Now, second question, is impact the same as outcomes? And if they are not, how are they different? If they are similar, how are they similar? So if you're going to say no, you have to give me an explanation. If you say yes, then similarly an explanation. Is impact the same as outcomes? All right, Ankita is saying that impact is more long-term as compared to outcome. Anybody who agrees or disagrees with her? Okay, Vaishvi is saying that both are long-term goals, but outcome leads to impact. So there is some kind of a chain in which that is being formed, wherein both outcome and impact are longer-term aspects, and a chain is linking one to the other. All right. Perfect. Interesting. Impact can be long-term, not a finished product. Okay, all right. Anybody else? All right. Third question. Is the impact of an intervention the same as the outputs of an intervention? So now we have three terms coming up: impact, outcome, output. Are they same? Are they different? Because when you talk to in regular parlance, we say, oh, you know, the impact of oil prices on something, or the effect of food security on something, or the outcome of this is this, or because we don't necessarily distinguish between these terms. But when we say, when we use them in the context of measuring impact, where do we place them in a hierarchy, or in a chain, or in some kind of causal relationship? How do we see this thing? Are they the same? Okay, Vaishvi saying outputs will lead to impact. All right, interesting. So Disha is giving an interesting answer in terms of the fact that output is a product, and then she's defined the others as experiences. I'm losing the chat. Yeah, perfect. Output is the direct result of the input given, and this could result in an outcome. Terrace, excellent, excellent, lovely. All right. Interesting, interesting. Great. So I think we have a varied set of answers, but I think what I'm broadly picking up is that output is the direct result of an intervention through the inputs. Outcome and impact are the longer term implications of an intervention or a policy or a social change of sorts, where an outcome in some sense is leading to the impact. That's the broad sense I'm getting. And thank you to all of you for sort of decoding impact with me, because that is exactly what we're going to be doing throughout the session. And we will use a particular tool to understand that. Some of you may be familiar with it, and some of you may be not so familiar with it, but it's called the theory of change. And the theory of change is essentially a description of how and why a desired change is expected to happen in a particular context. And essentially why it is important is because it helps to explain the missing middle. What is the missing middle? The gap between the intervention and the ultimate intended change. Right now, this may seem like a lot of jargon at this point, like, you know, what is she saying? Missing middle, intervention, intended effect, and all of that. Well, let's break it down in terms of an example, because that is something that works the best. For example, if there is a program that, let's say, provides vocational skills and this eventually helps to ensure better health outcomes for the workers. So how do you think a program that provides vocational skills, how is it ensuring better health outcomes for the workers? So what do you think are the missing gaps? And again, I would request you all to please use your chat box to fill in the 2 blanks that I've left empty in the blue box. How do you think a program that is skilling a worker is ensuring that ultimately he has better health outcome, sorry. All right, interesting. So Disha is saying earning opportunities leading to access to healthcare. Again, Tulika is agreeing with her. Right, absolutely. Upskilling leading to employment, leading to better access to health. Interesting, absolutely. So I think we are understanding once again that the theory of change is explaining that a program that is just barely giving them skills, let's say vocational skills, let's say carpentry, let's say some kind of, any kind of vocational skill, and that is ultimately ensuring that they have lower chances of getting tuberculosis. So how is that working out? And that missing middle is what you all have just explained, because when we look at the answer to this, it's very simple. Provision of skilling leading to employment and better income, leading to better access to health, and finally leading to better health outcomes. Of course, the theory of change, and this is a big caveat, is that it is written with assumptions. So we are assuming that the person has healthcare in the locality. We are assuming that he has a high enough income to get healthcare. But a very simplified version of how an intervention can broadly lead to an impact level change is what the theory of change is extremely useful a tool for. Yeah. And let's sort of break down the theory of change to understand how outputs, outcomes, and impact are linked to one another, right? And we will use an example to sort of correlate our understanding of how we will go about this. So let's start at the bottom and let's think about an example. Let's say there's an intervention that is providing awareness sessions to students in a particular underprivileged locality on gender equality, on fighting gender discrimination, on fighting gender-based violence. So let's say there are some awareness and training sessions given to students living in a particular underprivileged locality through, let's say, an NGO's intervention. And that is an intervention that we're talking about at this point. So when we look at it from the perspective of the framework, the inputs are the resources that are used in a program or a policy, the funds, the human resources. And in the case of our example, it is the provision of funds and resources for the gender sensitization workshops for the adolescents, who are the target population in our example intervention, right? That's the input level. The next stage is called the output level. What are the outputs? The outputs are essentially what we produce, right? And how we define it is the tangible products as a result of the inputs. So from the inputs, there are certain tangible products, as many of you defined in our chat, and those are the outputs. So from the input of the gender sensitization workshop, a direct output would be that adolescents are sensitized to gender and to gender equality, etc. That is the broad output that we can expect from this intervention. The next phase or the next stage in our theory of change is the outcome, what we achieve. Outcomes are the behavioral changes that result from the project outputs broadly. So outputs are creating some kind of behavior change, some kind of change in one's aspirations, change in one's ways of thinking, change in one's adoption pattern of certain ideas, innovative technologies, and that is a higher level of sort of change that is brought about. So that's the outcome. In the case of our example, the outcome perhaps could be that the adolescents become aware of gender equality and adopt gender-sensitive attitudes. That is the outcome, the change in behavior, the change in ideas, the change in the way one thinks, sort of, yeah? And the final thing is the impact. The impact is why we do it. The long-term, top-level changes, which are the result of that derive from the accumulation of outcomes. So a lot of you mentioned that impact is long-term, and you're absolutely right. Impact is long-term. Impact derives from outcomes, and impact is a result of the accumulation of outcomes. So in our example, we will give the example that, for example, rates of gender-based violence fall in that locality, wherein adolescents, through the input of workshops on gender sensitization, were trained and sensitized, which was the immediate output, which led to an awareness of gender equality and the adoption of gender-sensitive practices, which is the outcome, which eventually led to the rates of gender-based violence falling, which is the impact. And that is your theory of change. Input, output, outcome, impact. And that's how you explain how impact is to be understood and varied from outcomes and outputs. Because when you're looking at it, measuring impact, is very important to separate the outcomes and the outputs, because that's how you ensure that your evaluations are more robust, more rigorous, and you know exactly what to measure. So when we talk about what to measure, it's important to have the clarity on what to measure, and then moving forward in terms of how we go and measure it. Yeah. All right. Excellent. So I have a question coming up here, which is from Maitri, saying that by long term, do you mean even after the program has ended, or just at the end of the program? Maitri, at this point, I think it can be even after the program has ended. Ultimately, when we create programs, they are meant for long-term purposes and long-term consequences. So ideally, there could be studies, let's say, that measure the impact of a program 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years after the program is ended, to see whether the impacts still hold in the given population. So end-line study, of course, that's true. Summative evaluations, that's true as well. But they can even be way after a program has ended to see how they measure up in terms of the program's intended impacts. Yeah. All right. Excellent. Any questions further on this? Because we have a quiz coming up right after this, a tiny little MCQ coming up. So any questions at all? Right. Farheen is asking, is the impact in the framework different from goal? Farheen, I think all of these are goals. Outputs, outcomes, and impact are all goals. The difference is in how long-term or short-term one is and what sort of leads to the other, right? Even an output is a goal. Even adolescents getting sensitized on gender equality, etc., is also a goal at the very short term. At a medium term level, the goal may be to adopt gender sensitive practices. And in the longer term, it may be that the goal is that the rates of gender-based violence fall. So all our goals is just about the temporal aspect. Is it long term? Is it short term? And what leads to the other? Yeah, lovely. Okay. So Saloni is asking, how do we distinguish between outputs and outcomes in a more tangible terms? Saloni, the way I look at it, it's about the fact that when you create any kind of program, the immediate result of it is generally the output. Whereas a slightly more long-term one that involves a slight change in behavior, a change in the community's practices of adoption, let's say, adopting a new technology, adopting a new practice, changing their way of lifestyle, that is more linked to the outcome level indicators, whereas the output is the immediate one, right? For example, and we will come across this example very soon, but let's say a community is, given a new water treatment plant. So perhaps construction of water treatment plant through the funds given is the immediate output. But the outcome may be that, are they using it? Are they benefiting from it in terms of usage? Are they actually going towards it and utilizing it so that the water washes away the contaminants, etc. So the behavior, the engagement of the community with the intervention, that is the outcome level understanding. Yeah. All right. Thank you. We will move on to the next section in right now. So question time. All right. So we have 4 statements, and you have to arrange it in the order of inputs, outputs, outcomes, and impact. And I will read out the 4 statements to you. Please take some time and then let me know in the chat box what you think is the right answer. So the first statement is that girls are able to, so this is broadly an intervention wherein girls are given bicycles to go to school as opposed to walking. Yeah. So the first statement is that girls are able to ride bicycles to school as opposed to walking. Second is girls feel safer traveling to school on bicycles and go to school regularly. Third is provision of bicycles to school. And fourth is that the retention of girls in the schools increases. So let's see what the people's responses are. All right, people are overwhelmingly running towards option 2. Anybody for option 1? Or anybody for option 3 or 4? Okay, lots of people are saying option 2. All right. I'm not going to fight you guys anymore on this. You guys are absolutely correct. So well done on really applying something super fast in terms of what you did. Absolutely. So the first, so the input is the provision of bicycles to girls. It's the linked to provision of funds. It's the resources required. That's the input. The output is that the girls are able to ride bicycles to school as opposed to walking. That's the immediate result. The outcome is that the girls feel safer on bicycles and go to school regularly. That's the behavior change, outcome, longer term. The impact, the retention of girls in schools increases. So C, A, B, D, and all of those who came up with option 2, excellent work done. Right. All right, now we will go through a case study of evaluating a maternal and child cash transfer program in conflict-prone Rakhine state in Myanmar. This is an evaluation that I completed in 2020 on behalf of UNICEF in Myanmar. And I always like to use this case study when I'm explaining evaluations to a new audience, because it's one which was very rigorously constructed at one level, but was also very close to my heart. So I will take you through the case study. Feel free to jot down any points that you want, because we'll be going through a brief history or slash explanation of the case study, so to speak, and we'll apply them across the workshop. So let's go get through that. Yeah. So we are going to talk about the maternal and child cash transfer program, which is in the Chin and Rakhine states of Myanmar. For those of who, perhaps many of you know that Myanmar is among the 24 high burden undernutrition countries of the world. More than 1/3 of Myanmar's children suffer from chronic malnutrition. And as of 2015-16, 19% of children under the age of 5 were underweight, 29% were stunted, and 7% were wasted. And why we talk about Chin and Rakhine is that they are two of the most underdeveloped regions of Myanmar with very high rates of poverty and malnutrition. And that is where our program is based. And that is what we will be discussing through different stages of the evaluation process over the next hour or so. Lovely. Now, the intervention that we evaluated as a team of evaluators was the Maternal and Child Cash Transfer Program. What was the Maternal and Child Cash Transfer Program? It was a government of Myanmar initiative that provided a monthly cash transfer of 10 US dollars to all pregnant and lactating women, meaning that if you are a pregnant and lactating woman belonging to Chin or Rakhine, you will receive 10 US dollars in an envelope every month from the time that you get pregnant till the time that your child is 24 months of age, which is about 2 years, thereby covering the first 1,000 days of life from conception to 2 years. And some of you who may be working in the nutrition sector or in the health sector would know how vital the first 1,000 days of life are, because that is when a significant amount of cognitive, physiological, psychological development happens in a child's life. And as a result of that, the focus was very strongly on ensuring nutrition for the first 1,000 days of life, right? Apart from the money aspect of it, apart from the fund transfer aspect of it, there was also something called the mother support group, wherein every beneficiary, every pregnant and lactating woman was entitled to be a member of the mother support group. And these groups involved the conduct of monthly or quarterly awareness generation sessions. These are called SBCC sessions, stand for Social and Behavior Change Communication, wherein all the mothers would congregate in these groups in their villages. There would be a midwife who would be talking about health and hygiene and inform the mothers in some way on the ways they could perhaps utilize their cash transfer better so as to ensure the health and nutrition of their children, so to speak. Yeah. All right. I'm sorry. I'm just getting some question. Lovely. I think it's been answered already. Thank you so much for already answering the question. And I'm sorry I missed it. Thanks, Ritika. Thanks a lot. All right. So that is broadly the intervention that we evaluated in Myanmar for UNICEF. Maternal and Child Cash Transfer Program, where there was a cash transfer component of 10 US dollars, as well as an SBCC component, which was involving awareness. Yeah, lovely. Now, if all of you had to develop the theory of change for this program, which we just discussed, the MCCT program in Myanmar, what do you think would be the inputs, the outputs, the outcomes, and the impact? So why don't we start small? What are the inputs of the program? And then you can tell me what are the outputs, finally the outcomes and the impact. Palak, it's worth 10 US dollars per month. All right. So a lot of you are saying that the input is the cash transfer, the funds. Right. Right. Perfect. The inputs are the cash transfer. Okay. Let's check. Lovely. So as most of you have said, the inputs are the provision of the monthly cash transfer of 10 US dollars and the awareness sessions. That's the input. Yeah. And input is the most easy part of the theory of change. That's the best part to write about, is the resources and the funds utilized. So it's fairly the simple starting point to start our discussion. What do you think was the output? What is the output of the funds and the awareness sessions? What's the output? Let's go step by step. Let's not immediately jump to impacts. Let's go, what's the output? All right, nutrition, higher awareness levels, even below. The input is just that funds are available and monthly awareness sessions are available. So the immediate result of that, what is that? Okay. Yes, greater disposable income. Absolutely. Sensitized women. Absolutely. Right. So in this case, as you would remember, output is defined as the immediate result, what we produce. So the immediate result of women getting money in their pockets and awareness sessions every month or every quarter is that they have greater purchasing power, as well as greater awareness of health practices. They have the awareness. That is the output. They have the purchasing power. That is the output. That is the immediate result of those funds, of those SBCC sessions, of those experts being available to talk about these concepts. That's the output. What do you think is the outcome? What is the behavior change that is expected through the entire sort of intervention? What do you think is the outcome of the entire conversation. What's the outcome? Greater spending on child nutrition, absolutely. Mothers start eating nutritious food, absolutely. Awareness, yes, yes. Outcome, yes, absolutely. Increased focus on nutrition, women spending on children's health, better health, yes. They are utilizing those learnings from the SPCC sessions and using that cash transfer to spend on healthy and nutritionally diverse food. That is the outcome. That is the behavior change we're talking about. So mothers purchase nutritious food for themselves and their child and follow healthy child rearing practices. Absolutely. There is a behavior change aspect, because if you differentiate from the output is simply that they've got the money or they've got the awareness, but are they utilizing it? That's the output. Yeah. Finally, what is the impact? What's the impact of this? Absolutely, Srimoy. Fall in child mortality. That's one example. What else? What else could be the impact? Healthy children. Anything else? Improvement in nutritional outcomes. Absolutely. Fall in stunting and wasting. Excellent, Shruti. Lifelong, long-term impacts. Absolutely, Tulika. Well done. Great. Fabulous. The impact, and I've just given one example, the rates of child undernourishment fall, because that's the problem we started off with in the problem statement, which we went through in 2 slides back. But you're all absolutely right. So do you now understand that how funds and resources lead to results, lead to behavior change, lead to ultimate long-term sustained impacts? And that's what the theory of change is useful for. Yeah. And you all might still be wondering that, we came to this workshop to decode impact and to decode measuring impact, but we're still going on and on about a certain theory. Yeah. So why we are talking about the theory of change in such detail, and I hope that some of it is useful to you, is that you essentially help to derive indicators from the theory of change to measure later for your evaluation. So let's say you want to measure impact. You need to know how a theory of change is structured so that you know what impact is, how it is different from outcomes and outputs, and what indicators can measure impact. So if your impact, let's say, is rates of malnutrition fall, then, sorry, one second. Then your measurement indicators that you would be using is percentage of underweight children or maternal anemia rate. That's the measurement indicator you would be using to see how, to evaluate how impactful a program has been. If you're measuring outcomes, you will look at, let's say, percentage of mothers vaccinating their children or percentage of mothers ensuring dietary diversity for their children, because here you're measuring behavior, and you will not say that this is impact. This is more at the behavioral outcome level. Yeah. So and finally, when we look at outputs, you will perhaps look at increase in family income due to cash transfers or percentage of mothers aware of the benefits of breastfeeding. So again, when you create a theory of change, you can derive indicators from the sections of the theory of change, and those indicators help to measure impact. And that's why this entire discussion on theory of change and measuring impact. Do we have any questions at this point? I'll take 3. Any questions at all? Moshumi's already asked, can it also result in increase in pregnancy rate among the women who are not much aware? Moshumi, so in this program, I did not explain this in the program because we're running, we are short on time in terms of the fact that if we go into the program, it takes a bit of a time. But the program also had a sort of nudge towards birth spacing, wherein they said that you should the midwives would ideally guide the mothers to not have children with less than 2 years in the middle. So there was a push also to not have a very big explosion in the population. So I would not say that this intervention would directly increase the pregnancy rate. Riddhi is asking, were there any unintended consequences of the cash transfer? Riddhi, we will go into this in the next few slides. So I don't want to give it away right now, but we will go into this in the next few slides. How is vaccinating an indicator? Vaccinating is an indicator in terms of whether the mothers who got the awareness sessions from the midwives on various aspects, health, infant and child rearing practices, vaccination, breastfeeding, etc., are actually applying those learnings. So behavior change is about applying learnings or applying aspects of what one has soaked up or absorbed in the course of the SPCC sessions. So vaccination in this case is showing that the mothers are directly making sure that their children are healthy, and the information that they have got from the SPCC sessions therefore has been helpful and has been, in fact, it has been effective in that regard. Anything else? All right. We can move on to the next section then. Okay, I think we just got a question. All right. No, thank you. Perfect. No problem. Perfect. And finally is the link between the theory of change and the kind of evaluation to be used. So again, we have the theory of change: inputs, outputs, outcomes, and impact. If you are measuring the inputs, the outputs, and the outcome of a program, then what you are looking essentially to measure is using a tool called a formative evaluation or a process evaluation. So as you would see, the line on the right side of the formative evaluation is extending up from the inputs to the outputs to the outcome, but it's not going up to impact. So the first three stages of a theory of change are measured using a formative evaluation. This looks into the ways in which a program or a policy is implemented, and it is conducted generally during the implementation phase of a program. On the other hand, if you're measuring all four aspects of the theory of change: input, output, outcome, and impact, then you're looking at something called a summative or an impact evaluation. This is generally conducted at the end of an intervention or on a mature intervention or even after an intervention to determine the extent to which the anticipated results were realized. Yeah. So that's why again the theory of change is important, not only to understand how to derive indicators from the various steps, but also to understand what tools you can use to conduct the evaluation, so to speak, whether it is formative / process or impact / summative. Yeah. Tulika is asking, what if impact is only seen over the long term? Impact can be seen over the long term generally, but if an intervention is, let's say, ending soon, or you have to conduct an end-line evaluation or a summative evaluation, then you would have to use certain variables to sort of extrapolate about impact, and we will go into that in a bit. But so if an intervention is a short-term one or is still ongoing, and if the impact is going to be held or is going to be realized in a few years, then perhaps a formative or process evaluation is better, wherein you evaluate if it is being implemented properly and leave impact for later. Ritika is asking, how long ago should a program be introduced to measure the impact? Ritika, there is, it varies from program to program. Exactly, Meghna has absolutely given the right answer. It varies from program to program and the hypothesized change. For example, if it is, it depends on the community you're dealing with, it depends upon the context you're dealing with. It can be very smooth and simple. For example, it can be as basic as, let's say, deworming tablets are given out in the community, and maybe within a year you can measure health and nutrition impacts on children. But if it is something more behavioral, more cultural, perhaps it can be longer. So it's really a varied answer. Yeah. Ayush is asking, if the intervention is a continuous process, are only process evaluations conducted? Not really, Ayushi. Of course, it is a continuous process and a long-term one. Then impact would have been realized at some point, and that is what we would call a mature evaluation, if you would see on the right side of the screen. And that is where an impact or summative evaluation would even be applicable. Yeah. All right. Moving on, and this is a little resource that I have here to understand about the different types of evaluations. So I will just put this in the chat box for you all to browse later if you feel the need. Give me a second. So this is a lovely document that has been put together by the World Bank, and it is very useful to understand evaluation methods. So you all can have a look. Oh, no, wait, I need to send it to everybody. Yes. All right. So moving on to our next part, we have another little quiz coming up. So we have three statements here, as you can see, and you have to tell me which of the statements above is true. So the first statement is that the impact evaluations cover the aspects covered by the process evaluations. The second is that process evaluations are conducted after impact evaluations. And the third is the summative evaluation measures impact. So once again, using the chat box, I would request you all to please let me know what you think are the correct options. A lot of people are saying A and C. Anybody else who's saying B and C, all of the above? Whenever I see all of the above in any quiz, I'm very tempted to go and click on that. But clearly you guys are smarter than me. And I'm very glad you are, because all of the above is usually never the right answer. So yes, absolutely. A and C is absolutely the right answer. As you all know, a summative evaluation is also called an impact evaluation, and hence it measures impact. So option C is correct. Process evaluations are conducted after impact evaluations. That is incorrect, because process evaluations are implementation phase aspects, whereas the impact evaluations are post-intervention / mature intervention measurement aspects. And that, so B is incorrect. And A is again correct, because impact evaluations cover all 4 aspects of a theory of change, whereas process evaluations / formative evaluations cover only 3 aspects. So in some sense, what a process evaluation covers is a subset of what an impact evaluation covers. So absolutely well done to all of you for getting the answer right once again. And let's move on to the next section. All right. So in the last 45 minutes, we have covered what we evaluate. And then in the next 45 minutes, we will talk about how we evaluate. So what methods we use to measure impact is the next focus of our discussion. And we will again be using the Myanmar case study to go forth and to understand every aspect of what we will be discussing. So and we will be discussing how we evaluate in a broad 5-step framework. Of course, it is more nuanced than that. And it can be nuanced based on the context and based on the intervention that you're talking about. But broadly, when you talk about evaluations, these are broadly the 5 steps that you use to measure impact. And this is, of course, coming with a understanding of the theory of change, of deriving indicators, and of understanding the difference between summative and formative. So that's the little homework we did before, and now we get to the main stuff. All right. So the first thing that we do when we create an evaluation design is we start with the principles. How will we design our evaluations? What are the kind of broad ideas, the broad ideals we will be dealing with when we conduct our evaluations? And one of the aspects that is increasingly becoming the rage of sort of evaluation practice and evaluation best practices is mixed methods research, wherein you combine insights from the primary data, which can be both qualitative as well as quantitative, and the secondary data. Primary data is when you directly go and collect the data from the respondents. Secondary data is when you get the information from a source such as a research paper or a book or an internet source or a database, etc. Yeah. And when you triangulate and merge the insights and the results of the primary and the secondary using a variety of methods, you get mixed methods research, which is an important principle to keep in mind when you're conducting evaluation research. The second approach, or the second principle that we'll be talking about, is the participatory approach. The participatory approach is an approach wherein all the stakeholders within a given intervention, whether it's the beneficiaries, whether it's the implementers, the funders, the donors, etc., are consulted to gain a holistic picture of an intervention or a policy. So it is about everybody participating, giving their inputs, allowing conversation, dialogue, discussion, debate, and ensuring that every perspective is in some way reflected in the evaluation understandings to reduce bias and skewness in our results, right? So that's the broad top level understanding of principles of what to keep in mind when you're designing an evaluation study. And this is just something that you people can read up later about or think about when you go about evaluating programs on your own. The second step that we will be talking about is mapping the stakeholders. Who are stakeholders? Stakeholders are those who are affected or who affect the intervention. And essentially, when you are evaluating something, you need to be able to ask questions. And who do you ask the questions to? You ask the questions to the stakeholders. So mapping them is the first step, following which they can be approached for insights on how the intervention is progressing / has progressed, because you need to understand from real life people on how an intervention is progressing, and those are the stakeholders, and those need to be mapped to be asked the right questions to, using the right tools and the right data sources. And stakeholders can be bucketed into different groups. So you can have, let's say, the developers of the intervention, the funders, the implementing agencies, the on-ground staff, the direct beneficiaries, the indirect beneficiaries, the members of the community and the public, as well as the potential adopters of the intervention. That is a broad level in which you can bucket stakeholders. Of course, there are different metrics and different frameworks, but this is something that you can keep in mind when you're mapping the stakeholders whom you need to approach to gain insights about an intervention, which will eventually feed into your evaluation results. Yeah. All right. Now, when we talk about the case of the Myanmar case study, who do you think were the relevant stakeholders who would be able to provide information on the program and, let's say, its impacts? Who do you think were the relevant people who should have been consulted or who would have been consulted for this aspect? And I would request you all to use the chat box to please answer. Beneficiaries, members of the group, midwives, mothers, doctors, okay, all right. Funders, absolutely. Expert group, the elderly women around, excellent, Paki. Midwives, people conducting the sessions, policymakers, anybody else? Myanmar government, UNICEF members, ground level healthcare workers, healthcare providers. In the Myanmar context, who else was there? Who else you think would have been consulted or who would have had an impact on the program, was affected by the program, or somebody whose insights were valuable in understanding how essentially the program was successful or not? Family members of the target mothers, excellent, excellent. Village leaders, village people, absolutely. Well done. Right. So when we talk about the stakeholders, you all are absolutely right. You have the government of Myanmar, which is the sort of funding body in some sense. We have the implementing officials who are disbursing the cash. We have the midwives who provide training on the SPCC sessions. We have the beneficiaries who are the pregnant and lactating mothers. We have the husbands and other family members who are the indirect beneficiaries / community members. And we have the general members of the community and the public. So again, we have the entire gamut of stakeholders whom we have mapped in the course of the short conversation, who would be relevant in terms of providing information about the program and its impact. So first, you've started with principles. You've said, okay, I will use mixed methods research and I will make my design participatory. Second, you've mapped stakeholders. You've understood, okay, these are the people I need to consult to understand how a program is functioning. The third step is understanding how to get information from these stakeholders. What are the tools you will use to get information from the people that you've just identified? And that's where we come in terms of mixed methods research. Yeah. So first of all, we have the secondary data. Secondary data could be program documents. It could be sectoral reports, previously undertaken studies, data from government online portals, etc. Whereas primary data in terms of the tools that could be used for the quantitative aspect, wherein it is very numbers driven, data driven. It could be a beneficiary survey wherein you go and ask the experiences of the beneficiary. It could be a household survey wherein you go and ask the experiences of the entire household, which is receiving a cash transfer. On the qualitative side, which is not so numbers driven, which is more insights driven or thematic driven, you have key informant interviews, which generally are given to policymakers or to officials at a higher level. You have focus group discussions, once again among community members / beneficiaries / implementing officials. You may also have in-depth interviews among the implementing officials or the midwives. So that is broadly what is mixed methods research, combining the primary with the secondary, the qualitative with the quantitative, using a variety of tools key informant interviews, focus group discussions, surveys and interviews, and using a lot of data to balance it all out. And that is what we have been discussing. That is what we did in the Myanmar case as well. So for us, mixed methods research meant that our quantitative survey was for the pregnant and lactating women. The household survey was for the husband and the family members and the community members. The qualitative aspect of it, the key informant interviews were for the policymakers. The focus group discussions were for the midwives. The in-depth discussion interviews were for the implementing staff. And on the secondary side, we had the program guidelines, we had the past evaluations, as well as data from the Myanmar Information Management Unit. So you would understand that we were dealing with a large quantity of data, both qualitative and quantitative, both primary and secondary, which we had to sort of combine, collate, triangulate to come to our results. But that is the third step, choosing your tools and realizing how you will get the information from the stakeholders you identified in step number 2. So, Tulika, okay, we have 2-3 questions. Zahra asking, will we have access to these slides? Zahra, I think the presentation is being recorded, so I believe you would. Yeah, Vaishvi, I think, answered the question absolutely correctly. So I'm going to leave it at that. All right, moving on to the next step. The next step is triangulating the findings. Data triangulation is something perhaps some of you are familiar with, others it may be a new thing. And that is what we are here to discuss as well. Data triangulation is when data on the same topic is collected from multiple sources using multiple methods. As you understood, we are collecting data, let's say, on the cash transfer from the mothers, from the implementing officials, from the donors, funders, etc., using different methods: interview, FGD, focus group discussion, key informant interviews, so on and so forth. And why we do this is because it helps to cross-validate data and capture different dimensions of the same problem and thereby reduce respondent bias. And again, a whole lot of jargon, which I absolutely hate. So we will break this down to simpler things and say that we'll try to explain this with an example. Yeah. Basically saying that never listen to one person, always triangulate your findings and see what a bunch of people are saying before you come to a concrete conclusion about anything. And that applies to life as well. I mean, we always say never listen to WhatsApp forwards. So again, this is the evaluation speak of not listening to WhatsApp forwards. Always cross-validate, always capture different dimensions, always get different perspectives into the picture. And that's what data triangulation is about. And that's the 4th step of the entire process. So suppose we have a case study. For example, in the Myanmar case study, we want to understand if the cash transfer is effectively taking place. Now we have a beneficiary woman whom we have asked this question to. We have family members whom we've asked this question to. And we have a government official whom we've asked this question to. Now, the beneficiary woman and the family member, they are confirming that every month they receive $5 in their in an envelope. Whereas the government official who's disbursing the amount is saying that there is $10 that is given out. Now, in terms of what's happening, so in terms of what's happening, you would definitely understand that there is corruption in the system, right? If the government official is saying that there is $10 given out, but if the beneficiary woman and the family members are saying that they're receiving $5, then in some way there is corruption. There is leakages that are preventing the cash transfer from effectively taking place. And that's why it is so important to have so many perspectives in the picture, capture so many dimensions from different people, so that you ultimately come to a very robust conclusion instead of coming to only one-sided conclusions. For example, if we were looking at the cash transfer only from the perspective of the government official, we would think that it's working great. They're giving out $10 and it's done, right? But only when we listen to the family members or to the beneficiary woman, we understood that there is something else that's happening. There's something else that's missing in the picture. That's why data triangulation is extremely important for cross-validation and for capturing different dimensions. And that's the 4th finding. That's the 4th step, sorry. The 5th step is building conclusions and inferences. What is building conclusions and inferences? You triangulate the data, you come up with some common themes. Okay, this is how it's working. This is what this stakeholder is saying, but this is what 3 other stakeholders are saying. You combine them. You combine the secondary data, the quantitative primary data, and the qualitative primary data. And you combine all of these things to ultimately be able to create evaluation conclusions and inferences. That is how you create evaluation conclusions and inferences. So when we talk about decoding impact or measuring impact, it starts with a theory of change. It starts with knowing how inputs, outputs, outcomes, and impact interact with each other. It then goes on to deriving uh, the the indicator, so to speak. It goes on to understanding, do you need a summative or do you need a formative? Then it goes on to understand the principles you'll use, whether it's mixed methods, participatory, etc. Then you identify your stakeholders, you identify your tools, you collect the data, you triangulate your findings, and finally you build your conclusions and inferences. And that is what broadly an evaluation design looks like. Yeah. So, okay, any questions at this point? Because we'll do a little bit of a conversation, right? Or a sort of question, interaction after this. Any question at this point of the steps, of what we discussed, of the case study, anything? Any questions at all? If you have no question, just write no. If you have a question, ask the question. Okay, Renuka is asking, is this process only for mixed methods research? I mean, broadly, this is a process you employ everywhere. Of course, in mixed methods research, you have the qualitative and the quantitative coming in. So there is perhaps additional steps for data triangulation. Whereas if it was a purely quantitative based study, then there would not be a data triangulation step, which would be so focused in that stage. So I think data triangulation is something that is a very mixed methods sort of aspect, which is not there in other kind of evaluations to some extent. And that is something that differentiates this kind of study from the others. All right, Vidushi is asking me, is there any correlation between evaluating such programs and conducting RCTs? In the sense that can RCTs be used to evaluate such programs? RCTs, of course, as you would understand, is based on the potential outcomes model, which is about counterfactuals. And you would definitely need a sort of parallel matching population to be able to sort of have a control group and therefore conduct the RCT on. So this was a large scale evaluation involving 2 states, and we eventually created recommendations to scale it up to 7 more states. But I think for an RCT, it would require there to be a matching population. So in that sense, it would not be possible for this kind of a program. But if a program is being designed or piloted, perhaps at the pilot stage, it would make sense to have an RCT wherein you have a control group and a treatment group. In the treatment group, they receive the benefits of cash plus SPCC in an intervention form, and in the sort of control group, one doesn't. So maybe in the pilot stage, it would make more sense rather than after the full-fledged evaluation is all full-fledged intervention has already been implemented and sort of taken forward. All right. Samarpita Banerjee is asking, how do we deal with conflicting conclusions and inferences? Of course, Samarpita, there would be conflicting conclusions and inferences, and I think that is the best thing if there are. So in that sense, it is important to give a very balanced view of what's happening. For example, in our case, in some villages, the women were receiving the money very accurately on the dot, whereas in other cases, they were not receiving the money at all. And there were certain causes behind it, or reasons behind it. Let's say the geographical terrain there was very poor in the villages that were receiving the payments in a very delayed fashion. So when we overall presented the findings to UNICEF, we could not say a black yes or a black no. We had to say that, in certain villages, there were positive responses about the cash transfer being effective. However, effectiveness is diminished in certain cases in the villages of X and Y, wherein geographical barriers created challenges of accurate or efficient transfers. So it's about presenting your findings, ensuring that both perspectives are included, there is balance in the findings, and as well as the fact that, of course, there is accuracy in what one is saying. All right, how do we deal with conflict? This is done. Could you give case study examples that have used either mixed method research or participatory approach? Saloni, so the entire evaluation that I'm talking about right now is based on mixed method research or participatory approach. And I will be linking the evaluation report to the chat as soon as the workshop is over, so that you all can have a look in terms of how we actually did it and how the report finally looked like, which UNICEF appreciated. Right. And any other questions if I'm missing? Okay, I'm going to move on to the next stage. If I've missed your question, I will take it in the end or I will take it after the workshop. But I would just like to wrap this one up before we lose time. All right. So in the Myanmar case study, let's say we want to test how we can build conclusions and inferences. We want to understand if the cash transfer leads to women empowerment. Now we have three different findings from three different sources / methods. So the UN report, let's say, on Myanmar is telling that elders play an important role in Burmese society. The beneficiary survey that we conducted is saying that 70% of the beneficiary women said that they did not play a role in deciding the cash usage. And finally, the FGD, or the focus group discussion with the husbands of the beneficiaries, is telling us that our wives receive the money, but our mothers determine how it is used. Based on these three findings, how do you think you can triangulate and build conclusions and inferences? So why don't we use the chat box to tell me how you would use these three findings to build conclusions and inferences? Anybody? Okay, so Srimo is saying women do not have autonomy about how the money is being spent despite being the beneficiaries in the official terms. Excellent. Tulika saying the cash transfer increased disposable income, but the mother did not decide how the income would be used. Okay, all right. So cash transfers are not changing the social constructs in the family. Absolutely, Garima. Elderly women are getting empowered rather than the targeted one. Absolutely, Meera. Women don't have the autonomy about how the money is being spent despite being the beneficiaries in official terms. Absolutely. Lovely. Excellent. So you all have done a fabulous job of combining the insights from the three different sources. And now you would appreciate how important it is to actually have three different kinds of sources. We had a secondary source, we had a primary quantitative source, which is a beneficiary survey, and we had a primary qualitative source, which is a FGD. And we combined the insights from the three and came up to our conclusions. And that is what I'm trying to emphasize upon, that it is very important to combine insights, combine findings before we come to results, because otherwise would be very biased and that would do a great disservice to the program or the intervention that we're evaluating. So absolutely triangulating these three insights makes it very clear that while the pregnant or lactating women are the beneficiaries who receive the cash, they do not have a role in the usage. The mothers-in-law play a key role in determining the cash usage, a conclusion that is supported by secondary literature, which is the UN report, which talks about the role of elders in Burmese society. Yeah? All right. Fabulous job done and on triangulation. And that's the fifth and last step in terms of building conclusions and inferences. And again, it's a little quiz time. So we have four statements that have been given to us. This are the four statements that are about a skilling program that provides placements to underprivileged rural youth. Yeah. You will find these four statements. One is from a state level official. So it's a state level official is given a focus group discussion. One is from the National Skilling Report. One is from a beneficiary survey, and one is from the beneficiary FGD. Based on these four statements, and I will give you a minute to read and not talk in the middle. Based on these four statements, how would you triangulate and what would you conclude? Anybody? All right, sorry, we have coming in. Okay. Paki, yes, absolutely. I will drop the MCCT report link in the chat. All right. So people want to learn new skills to improve their home areas rather than moving to urban areas in search of such placement. Excellent work, Beshvi. Youth primary aim is to acquire new skills. However, there seems to be few opportunities or incentives which make them want to undertake employment. All right. So Anjali is saying a skilling program would be matching their needs more than a placement program. Okay, Zehra, excellent work. Youth from the rural areas are reluctant in taking up jobs in the urban areas, but would want to take up fresh skills to work in their local areas. All right, fabulous, excellent. Absolutely well done. So if you look at it, we start with the fact that we start with what we get from the National Skilling Report. We say that the targets for placement have not been met this year because the rural youth find it difficult to adjust to urban jobs. And where are we getting this from? The state level official. The prospect of urban placements is not very attractive to them. Instead, they want to learn new skills and improve their native villages. This we are getting from the fourth statement, which is the beneficiary FGD. Thus, the program's focus on urban placement should be diminished and rural placements should be explored. So at the same time, we know that they want to learn a skill, but they also want to work towards their native villages. And that's why perhaps urban placements have not worked so far, and they are finding it difficult to work in the urban area. So when you're combining these four, you come up with some kind of a broad analysis or broad inferences, which definitely help to explain something in a multidimensional capacity. And that's what is data triangulation. That's what is building conclusions and inferences based on evidence, based on mixed methods, based on the merging of insights rather than looking at only one perspective, so to speak. So at this point, I would be wrapping up with a couple of concluding remarks and something that I would want you all to keep with you as the broad insights from this workshop, and I will be taking up questions after that. So the first thing that I would want to keep and as a primary lesson of today is that impact is not the same as outcomes. Yeah, because we've discussed this. Outcomes, outputs, and impacts are all different. They are linked to one another through the theory of change, and they help to understand the type of evaluation to be used or the indicators to be used, but they are not the same as each other. The second thing is that the theory of change is crucial for measuring impact. As we've understood, it helps to understand the evaluations to be utilized. It helps to understand the tools to be used. It helps to understand the indicators to be utilized. And therefore, it is crucial to build that into our understanding before we evaluate a program. The third thing is that mixed methods research is important for getting a holistic picture. This is very clear by now, that mixed methods research is extremely crucial for getting a holistic picture because you are triangulating insights, you're reducing respondent bias, you're reducing methods bias because you're linking the methods, the results of a survey with those of an FGD, with those of a key informant interview. So you're reducing bias all the way through mixed methods, through qualitative and quantitative, primary and secondary, and that is extremely important for holistic results. The fourth is, it's first very important to map the stakeholders and then to assign the tools for collecting data from them. We've done this in terms of stakeholder mapping, and we understood this in terms of the case study of Myanmar as well. And the final mantra that I would want to leave you all with is that never go with just one data source, always and always triangulate. And that is what I would want to leave you all with. It's been a pleasure to speak with all of you and to interact with all of you. You all have been a wonderful, wonderful audience for the workshop. You have been so interactive and it's been absolutely marvelous. My Instagram is actually not, it's slightly updated. I'm just going to share that on the chat, but I'm available on my email as well for further queries, conversations, discussions. I conduct workshops on a variety of topics, including general life skills such as public speaking, information literacy, as well as aspects that are very focused on economics or econometrics or the development sector, including this workshop, as well as behavior change. I also conduct workshops on human rights, on online violence against women, hate speech and bullying. So if any of you feel that I would be of benefit to your organization, to your college, or to your department, I would be very happy to conduct a pro bono workshop similar to this on topics I've discussed or something new in the future as well. So feel free to reach out to me. And thank you once again for being a fabulous audience. And I will just share the link of the report in the chat box, as well as my Instagram handle. Sorry, I was trying to squint and look at the thing. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you all enjoyed the session, and I'm glad you had such a lovely time. Thanks for being a lovely audience. And I'm just sharing the report link as we speak. Oh my God, I need to send it to the whole group. I end up sending it to only one person. There we go. This is my Instagram handle, where I keep posting about my workshops as well. All right, any other questions? I think we got a couple of questions in the beginning. Maitri is asking any advice on how to put qualitative and quantitative data together when discussing impact. I can clearly see why qualitative data fits with the, but how does it fit into the impact evaluation to discuss impact? I think, Maitri, qualitative data really helps to qualify what one is saying. So let's say we are talking about impact. We say that the rates of malnutrition fell in a particular area. That's the impact level conversation, right? And when we qualify that with the snippets of conversation or the snippets from an interview of, let's say, a beneficiary woman who is actually saying that my child's weight has increased in the last 6 months, or the fact that a village leader is, let's say, talking that the rates of child mortality in our village have fallen in the last 3 years, then that adds a kind of human dimension to it. It adds a kind of evidence to it that perhaps is not well captured in just a number. So I think the human dimension is very important when it comes to talking about impact, particularly when you're working with donors, when you're working with an international development space, where you need to have the beneficiary voices coming through when while evaluating a discussion, while evaluating an intervention. All right, anything else? Lots of questions. Okay. What if the data we collect from different sources is contradictory in nature? How do we measure impact then? Sudisha is saying. So of course, again, Sudisha, one cannot come up with one direct sort of impact from the intervention. One has to be very cognizant of the fact that when one is describing impact, one gives the impact that, okay, the primary data is saying that the impact has been positive. However, we must be cognizant of the fact that the secondary data is disagreeing with this, or is sort of tempering the results of this by saying XYZ. So we present both of them together in a sort of merged or balanced finding. The link is showing some kind of error. All right. Wait, let me, give me a minute. I will find you another one. The link keeps doing that sometimes because with the situation in UNICEF at this point, UNICEF Myanmar's website is not working very well, but never mind. I will give you another link, which is linked to the research, the Relief Web's website. Till then, I will try to ask some questions, answer some questions. When we create a theory of change, we map our intended or expected outcomes. How do we ensure that unintended consequences are also measured, captured in the measurement framework? Tulika, I think unintended consequences are generally measured in terms of case studies, because unintended consequences are sort of removed in many cases from the framework because we have a bunch of assumptions working. So we assume that the mothers adopt practices, we assume that there is no conflict or war happening, which ensures that they are able to go to those SPCC sessions. So there are a lot of assumptions. And when there are unintended consequences, we put them in a separate section of the report or as a case study or something like that. So that's generally how one tends to capture it. Anything else? Am I missing something? Any advice for upcoming econ freshman undergrad? I'm absolutely the wrong person to be giving advice to upcoming econ freshmen. I was always out of class when I was in SRCC. I was always doing everything else but studying. So I think I realized how important it is to be in class way after I was in first or second year. I think it was in third year. I mean, the founder of this group, Prerna, was far more studious and far more academically inclined than have ever been. So I think she would be a much better person to sort of answer this question. But in terms of anything, I would definitely say always apply what you're doing in class to what you're doing outside. So look for research internships, look for writing papers, look for using evidence in new ways, look for participating in social entrepreneurship, let's say Enactus or Connecting Dreams Foundations. So all of those things are extremely important and very essential to adding to your personality and of course to your resume, and sort of balancing what you learn in class with what you can apply in the real world. So always ensure that what you do in class is not just something in abstract or in in theory. It's actually linked to what happens in the real world, because ultimately all of us have to go out in the real world and become policymakers, policy analysts, researchers, and in some way change the world. All right. Anjali is asking how to land research internships as a fresher. Anjali, I would be happy to have this conversation if you would just write to me in person, and I would just answer this question perhaps in an email or something, and we could get on a call maybe. Srimoy is asking, I happen to not have a background in eco, but this session, oh, thank you so much. Thank you. This was, I'm glad it helped you. Any ideas on how I must learn some quantitative skills, any resources? Srimoy, I think the best way, the way I learned Excel or anything else was a bunch of free resources online. R is a software is coming up right now, and there are a lot of free resources online as well. So I think that would be very helpful. These are like 3-month courses, 1-month courses, depending upon your time. And these are fairly simple if you just want to get a hang of it. And I'm very excited that you are looking to explore this area as well, because it's an interesting area that is coming up. So good luck with that, and let me know how that goes. Yeah. Guys, I will try to send the link on the group. I'm sure all of you are there on the WhatsApp group, so I will just send it as soon as the session ends. No worries, Tulika. Thank you so much for participating so well. And I think I'll give the mic over to Ayushi once again. I pretty much think we're done.
Thank you so much, Rai. From the entire Women in Econ group, I'd like to extend a heartfelt gratitude for taking so much time out and walking so many members through a very, very insightful workshop. For those members who are constantly inquiring, don't worry, the session was recorded, and so the recordings will be shared with everybody shortly after. I think if there are no further questions on the workshop itself, we're okay to wind up. Again, Rai, thank you so much for the time that you've taken out. It was a very, very insightful session, and I'm sure everybody learned a lot in this 1.5 hours. And for those of you who've joined us for the first time or the first few times, we do conduct more such sessions on different platforms. So please stay tuned and be a part of any upcoming announcements that we make. We do a lot of career advancement and research-based methodology sessions as well. So thank you again, Rai, and thank you everybody for joining in on a long weekend and being such an interactive audience. I'll be closing the session now. The recording will be made available to everybody very soon. Thank you.
Bye, guys.